Hello, my name is Dr. Joanne Carney, Professor of Education at Western Washington University. My guest today is Representative Sharon Tomiko Santos of the state of Washington, who is a lead author for House Bill 2799, which created the Collaborative Schools for Innovation and Success, or CSIS, project in 2012. This pilot provided funding for 3 partnerships between colleges of education and low-performing schools in different parts of the state. The partnerships began with a comprehensive needs assessment during a planning year, followed by funding for 5 years of implementation of innovative practices designed to close the educational opportunity gap for elementary students and better prepare teachers who could work effectively in high-need schools. This issue of the Journal of Educational Controversy focuses on the work of the CSIS partnership between the Woodring College of Education at Western Washington University and Washington Elementary School in Mount Vernon, a small rural city in an agricultural valley about 30 miles south of the university. Ethnically, the students at Washington School are 2/3 Hispanic and 1/3 white. A percentage of the students listed as Hispanic, however, are actually of indigenous origin from Oaxaca, whose families may not speak either Spanish or English initially. Just under 80% qualify for free or reduced lunch. 1/3 of the students receive transitional bilingual support services, and about 25% live in migrant families who move frequently for work. Overall, these figures exceed state averages and represent significant educational challenges for the school. Based on our comprehensive needs assessment conducted in fall 2012, we identified a significant achievement and educational opportunity gap for many of the students at Washington School, in particular Hispanic students, English learners, and boys. As a result of these findings, we focused our efforts on developing the following innovative practices. Number 1, promoting family engagement in the school by conducting family visits and developing parent leaders among Latino families in particular. Number 2, providing in-school support for students and families who may be experiencing trauma. 3, enhancing family literacy in both English and Spanish. 4, using educational technology to enhance assessment and instruction. 5, addressing the gender gap. 6, offering targeted professional development for in-service teachers and modifying the preparation of new teachers to enhance both of their cultural responsiveness and ability to teach students with limited English proficiency. And finally, developing a supported pathway to teaching for local students in order to diversify the teaching force in the future. The length and generosity of the funding made it possible for us to tackle complex and seemingly intractable problems in a holistic and organic way that was uniquely situated and suited for the particular school and community context. Because of this, we achieved a number of notable successes, which are described fully in the articles found in this issue of JEC. The lessons we've learned through our CSIS work are prompting systemic change and informing planning at both the school district and the university. To highlight a few areas of particular impact, we have begun to see a reversal of the negative achievement trends for students that were apparent in the initial needs assessment. We have offered a number of professional development and intervention initiatives that are of great benefit for English learners and students impacted by poverty. Those enhancements in instructional practice and family support have informed priorities and decision-making at the district level. We have developed a place-based approach to the placement and preparation of new teachers that is being extended to the entire elementary teacher preparation program. We have prepared over 100 new teachers in this Skagit Valley community, many of whom are choosing to teach either in the community itself or in other high-need schools throughout the state. And finally, we have developed a strong university-district partnership that will continue beyond the end of CSIS funding. As an introduction to the articles that describe the work of our CSIS partnership, we wanted to have some conversation with Representative Santos about the origins and intent of this innovative program. Representative Santos, first of all, I'd like to thank you for making time to talk with us today. As you know, the Collaborative Schools for Innovation and Success grant project is ending in June after 1 year of planning and 5 years of implementation. And we have been writing a series of articles, a number of them for Western's Journal of Educational Controversy. And so we anticipate that our conversation today will shed some light on the beginnings of the project as we are now approaching the end. I wonder if I could, to begin, read from a memo that OSPI put out in May of 2012 that summarized the purpose of ES-HB 2799, which inaugurated the Collaborative Schools for Innovation and Success grant project. And then after I read that one paragraph of summary, I'd like to ask you a few questions about the beginnings of this project.
Perfect.
The 2012 legislature passed legislation ES-HB 2799 that created the Collaborative Schools for Innovation and Success pilot program. The purpose of the act is to authorize a pilot project where colleges of education collaborate with school districts to establish collaborative schools for innovation and success, serving particularly at-risk and low-achieving students. Each collaboration is intended both to accelerate student achievement and deepen the knowledge and skills of current and future educators. The initial collaborations are to occur in elementary schools. With that reminder, I'd like to begin asking some questions about the beginnings of the project.
Please.
First of all, what was the inspiration for this bill?
There were a number of pre-existing conditions that laid the groundwork for the creation of this bill. One of which you may recall was, by that point in time, 10 years worth of chaos in the field of education with respect to the No Child Left Behind Act and all of the requirements of the No Child Left Behind Act. I think it's important to recall that context because you will recall that the intention behind No Child Left Behind was to ensure that every student in the United States had the benefit of an excellent educational experience, and that all students would be able to meet the same rigorous levels of proficiency regardless of their background. Now, the challenges, of course, with the No Child Left Behind Act were its very prescriptive approach and punitive approach to not meeting proficiency. And we, those of us who work in the field of education policymaking, recognize that one of the challenges is that many of our school district personnel and the students who are in those school buildings based is that they were working within a policy framework that looked at schools effectively as factories, and that looked at students effectively like widgets. And of course, then all of the staff in the school building were our factory workers. Well, clearly there's nothing further than the truth about what the education process is and what our students represent. And we thought, you know, there really has to be a better way of approaching how do we ensure that all children do have excellent experiences in school that recognize and respect the multiple assets that these students bring, but also recognize that each student brings individual challenges and into the school building. And the challenge before our education professionals is, how do you tailor that educational experience so that no child is left behind? One of the other elements that we also recognized is, because the factory model of education had certainly been in existence all across America for decades, for 100 years or more, our colleges of education were still churning out teachers to work into that kind of environment. And yet there was this huge chasm that existed between our colleges of education, who were preparing our teachers, and the realities that existed in our schools today, both in terms of the diversity, in terms of the expectations. And so one of the things that we were trying to do was to create the bridge whereby we drove innovations at both levels for the success of our students, so that colleges of education had real life experience in the day-to-day lives of our teachers, our principals, our school counselors, and other educators, that they got to see exactly the fact that we were no longer teaching to a homogenized classroom that may have existed perhaps in the 1930s or 40s. And at the same time, to drive the kinds of improvements that were expected under No Child Left Behind for the benefit of our students.
Thank you. In some ways, you've answered, at least at a high level, question number 2, but I'll ask it anyway on the chance that you might want to elaborate or become a little bit more specific. What did you hope that these projects would achieve, besides creating that bridge to drive innovation in schools and colleges of education?
Yes, thank you for giving me the chance to elaborate. Again, the context of the No Child Left Behind Act put into place in Washington State a situation where we had, rather than increasing levels of support to our schools that were struggling, we instead saw increasing levels of punitive outcomes for those schools and ultimately for the students, whereby the highest level of punishment was the dismantling of the school itself. That seemed to be the wrong approach, again, to provide the kind of supports that actually our educators in school buildings crave and desire. And we said there's got to be a way to create multiple tiers of support rather than punishment, so that those educators in the building can actually deliver the kinds of on-time supports that our students need, whether it's academic supports or counseling supports, or perhaps in some cases it's supports outside of the actual school building deliverables. Maybe it is helping connect that student and his or her family with other resources in the community to address homelessness or food insecurity or mobility. The idea of pairing the colleges of education was in part a realistic recognition that this was before we had a McCleary lawsuit, certainly before there was a McCleary lawsuit that was decided, and our schools did not have adequate financial resources. But we also knew that we wanted to prepare the next generation of educators to be able to experience in real time the real issues that they will be experiencing once they graduate from the colleges of education in Washington State. As you know, working in the higher education field, theory can take a student so far. But when you actually give the students the practical opportunity to live out and test what they are learning through books in a real life situation, and then go back and debrief with their professors, well, you've achieved deeper learning.
Mm-hmm. And the partnerships between the districts and the colleges of education hopefully would establish the settings where that can occur. Correct?
Exactly. And I will say that, pardon me, well, I will say where we sit today, which is, of course, now, 7 years after we adopted the legislation, certainly my own journey into discovering more about what works in the field of education has continued to move forward. And I've been very fortunate to work with other legislators from all across the country, state legislators who work in the field of education, to explore very deeply the lessons that might be gleaned from the practices and policies of education systems in the highest performing nations of the world. Produced in 2016 a study called No Time to Lose that really takes a look at what makes these high performing education systems work. And it is, of course, not a surprise to all of you who have been engaged in the CSI's project that a core feature of high-performing education systems is a highly professionalized, cohesive, and coordinated system of educator, professional development, and support from the beginning teacher, actually even before the beginning teacher, from the student who has expressed an interest in teaching, to the beginning teacher, to your middle career teacher, to your veteran teachers. And I share that because even though that was not part of my initial thinking when we were developing the CSIs, I'm so very, very pleased to know that best practice and research in international systems of education bear the same conclusions that you and your colleagues, both at Western Washington and the other CSI projects, have come to. And so that's very gratifying to me.
Wonderful. As you mentioned, there is one project here at Western Washington University, a partnership with the Mount Vernon School District. And there are two other sites, one at the University of Washington, a partnership with the Seattle School District, and a third in Spokane, where the higher education partners are Whitworth and Gonzaga. Now, in setting up those three project sites, as you were learning about best practices from high-performing school systems around the world, what were you hoping to learn from these three CSIS sites?
Two pieces in particular that I would bring to your attention is we really must take a look at how our colleges of education are being allowed to innovate and work directly in partnership in the schools. In other words, we need to move away from the Middle Ages approach of having these ivory towers where all knowledge is dispensed to the masses, and instead create a synergistic partnership between the objects of our intent, which is the local schools and school districts, and of course the beneficiaries of those local schools and school districts, our students, and make sure that our higher education institutions are working with on-time information and real life examples of what educators face on a daily basis. To that end, we have been working for the last several years on a pretty comprehensive educator workforce bill to begin to align the different preparation programs, first with the colleges of education, but also taking a look at how do we support those local partnerships with the school districts so that they're more authentic, much like what you have there specifically at the Woodring College of Education. Is we know that those practicums, those student residencies are so valuable, both for the students, in this case, I mean your students, but also for the districts who have been able to then see what these new students, teachers are capable of. It's a very powerful model, I think, and we need to be able to allow for more of those powerful innovations at the colleges of education that serve as a win-win for students, whether they are college students or students who are in our K-12 system.
One of the things that we have talked about with the other sites, and we feel is very significant for our success, is the fact that this grant project was very generous. This was a significant amount of money. It also allowed for a planning year so that we could develop an innovation and success plan, and then 5 years of implementation. This kind of long-term project with generous funding is quite rare, to the extent that we are writing articles for a special issue of the Teachers College Record, because we feel that this actually deserves national attention. So is there any discussion of those characteristics of the Collaborative Schools for Innovation and Success grant project as a guide for developing additional funding for innovative projects that drive the kind of educational change that you're looking for?
Well, and I appreciate that question, and I hope that you will also appreciate that one of the reasons to move out with a generous and a sustained grant project is to really take a look at what kind of systems reform might be birthed out of that process. And when we talk about systems reform, we know that an education system that is funded by grants is not really a system. It is only a project-based experience for the users and for those who are participating in it. So it is certainly my hope and expectation that the systems reforms that are the lessons learned from these CSIs will be embraced by the decision makers at the local districts and at our colleges, recognizing the value of maintaining and supporting these types of collaborations. So I'm not so sure about the future of creating a grant program. I'm not going to say that it's not going to happen, but that was not our intent, to create a permanent grant program. Our intent was to create systems change based on your experiences. And but at the same time, I think the other piece of this that I'm hearing you ask is about, and what kind of funding can the schools and the colleges expect for successful system reforms? One of the issues that I would point to is, again, legislation that we've been developing probably over the last couple of years, has to do with reforming the Learning Assistance Program, the funding thereof, and the ways in which those funds are used. So again, I'm going to step backwards and remind us that CSIs were developed within the context of No Child Left Behind. And the focus of No Child Left Behind was to eliminate the idea of quote unquote struggling schools. And whether eliminating them meant, dismantling them, or eliminating them meant making changes either in personnel or in practice or what have you, that is very, very key to understanding not only what are we trying to accomplish with CSIs, but also moving forward when we talk about Learning Assistance Program, because Learning Assistance Program is also a program that is designed to address the needs of those students who are experiencing the greatest challenges staying on top of whatever the current expectations are for proficiency. And unfortunately, again, the past experience and the past framework has been about labeling. What we want to move more towards is saying, we know that in the past, LAP dollars have been the dollars that school districts love the most, because it has been the most free of strings, if you will. It is the most, the school districts have the greatest discretion over how those funds are spent. They are supposed to be spent on improving the academic achievement and proficiency of students, particularly struggling students. But there has been zero accountability, and we've had some studies in the past that show, well, money's out there, but how do we know that we're getting our money's worth? Where we are trying to move learning assistance, there's two pieces that I think are important for researchers such as yourself to consider. One, learning assistance program dollars are part of basic education. This is not a grant. This is not subject to the whims of how much revenue is coming into the state, and so do we scale that up or scale it down? No, this is part of basic education that is delivered to every school district in the state of Washington based on the prototypical school funding model. So, so that's one thing. Two, you will know that over the last couple of years, the legislature has infused a great deal of funding into the basic education, in part because of the directive of the Supreme Court, but also because we know it's the right thing to do. Having said that, we also know that having these discretionary dollars that have increased by significant amount without any type of parameters on use is probably not really a good policy. So learning from, again, multiple sources, including the CSIs, what we have been proposing for LAP reform is to assure our school districts, these continue to be discretionary dollars. The state is not going to tell you what to spend the money on, other than it is designed, again, to support those students who need learning assistance. But taking a page out of the CSI's playbook, we are insisting that these dollars be spent first by having school districts and schools engage in a comprehensive needs assessment. What does the school district need? What the schools need? And those are going to be driven by the unique issues in every school and what the students bring in. We also are saying that those, before any decisions are made about how those funds are spent, we want to make sure that the community is engaged in the dialogue around what are those needs and how are the best ways to spend it, including what are the resources beyond just dollars that exist in the community where those dollars will be spent. Do you have certain community centers? Do you have a health center that wants to come in and provide services to your students? And then the last piece of the reform for the LAP program is to then require school districts to maintain and follow the data, because if the LAP decisions or the decisions around the LAP dollars are not producing the kinds of results that the administrators, the educators, and the community expect, then we would hope that the administrators, the educators, and the community will say, okay, we tried that, that doesn't work. We need to move to a different solution rather than relying on, oh, that great program that's being run by so-and-so's brother-in-law in the community who happens to be a muckety-muck in the community. That's not the right way to spend those LAP dollars.
Indeed not. We are very grateful that the CSIS project has contributed to your understanding of how learning supports might be provided in various ways to provide educational opportunities, additional educational opportunities for students who might have been negatively impacted by poverty, or who may be English learners and need those supports. What else would you like people to know about the genesis or outcomes of CSIS? This is like a summary type question.
So I think that we know, based on your experiences and your work, that it is important for the state to establish frameworks, but not to be micromanagers of what happens in any site. And I think that that was something that I had to fight very hard for, is to allow for the integrity of each community to be fully realized in each CSI project. We need to do the same thing with education throughout the state. Mount Vernon School District is going to be very, very different from the Mount Lake Terrace School District, which is going to be very different from the Mattawa School District. We need to be able to allow each of those school districts to flourish in a fashion that is appropriate to that community. At the same time, we also need to make sure that we are equipping all of our educators, both those who are already in the system as well as those who are coming out of our colleges of education, with a uniform set of skills to be able to traverse across the state and to be able to be successful in any one of those school districts, whether they are a rural school district, a suburban school district, an urban school district, whether they're high poverties or very affluent communities. To know that you are going to be facing students who may be presenting with unseen social and emotional needs is something, as an example, that I think we want all of our new educators to be able to recognize and to be able to manage. I can't think of very many places in the state that are untouched by ELL students, and that is only going to grow. So I think we are looking towards, in answering your question, how do we see a fuller realization of CSIs as we move in your students in the elementary schools into the upper grades? And that's something that I think we will also be taking a look at through, again, sparking that interest of perhaps pursuing a teaching degree as early as the 8th grade with our high school and beyond plan, and really taking a look at work integrated learning, which would be inclusive of careers in education, and using that also as a strategy to keep students engaged in their learning and therefore keep students engaged in school from the earliest grades until they hit the high school graduation and into their future careers and hopefully college.
In summary, on behalf of our CSI team, I'd like to thank you and other legislators for all the work you have done, not just on this grant project, but all the other initiatives and policies that you've described. We really appreciate the thoughtful, insightful, well-informed way that you have designed this project. And for us, it has been a very meaningful and rewarding experience to work in partnership with the Mount Vernon School District. And I hope you have seen in our various annual reports evidence of positive impact, both in improving student achievement at Washington School and also bringing about systems changes in the College of Education